Huge news for UFC fans across the world just came out as Francis Ngannou may finally be returning to the UFC heavyweight division. Now, at the end of Jon Jones' crash out the other day on Twitter, which you could see in my last YouTube video, we uploaded the whole thing and reacted to it all. You could see Jon Jones called out Francis Ngannou for a fight after Francis Ngannou said he's not totally closed off to coming back to the UFC. Francis then responded to that fight and Jon Jones responded again, and they are both mutually interested in fighting each other. 2 days after that, UFC 316 happened and Dana White held his post-fight press conference where someone asked him about the potential of Francis Ngannou coming back to the UFC to fight Jon Jones. Real quick word from our sponsor, Travis Herrick, that is me. The sponsor says you should subscribe to this video because we're trying to hit 800 subscribers by my birthday, which is June 15th. It's 1 week away, but we're going to try to get to our subscriber goal. Thank you guys. Back to the video. Dana started off by giving the right answer that Jon Jones' next fight, no matter what, needs to be Tom Aspinall. However, Dana White did not deny or reject the idea of Francis Ngannou coming back to the UFC at all, which if you've been following Francis Ngannou and Dana White over the years, this is huge news. Because every time in the past when Dana White's ever been asked of Francis Ngannou, he would belittle him in every way possible, say that he's not a good person, and that there's no way that Dana White will ever do business with Francis again, meaning that Francis will not be fighting in the UFC ever again as long as Dana White's in charge. However, that didn't happen this time. Things were smooth sailing, he had nothing to say about Francis. So this leads many fans to think that Francis said he was interested in coming back to the UFC and Dana didn't shut it down at all, that maybe something happened behind the scenes and the relationship is not as bad as it used to be. Now maybe it's not great, but your relationship doesn't have to be great with a fighter to sign him to your promotion. There are multiple fighters in the UFC that Dana White doesn't like, but still actively fight in the UFC. So this could be huge news for getting one of the best heavyweights in the world back in the UFC. So this begs the question to UFC fans all across the world, is what would it look like for the heavyweight division and Francis Ngannou if he came back and fought in the UFC? Now Francis hasn't fought in the UFC in about 3-4 years now, and he's instead been chasing boxing fights with some of the best boxers in the world, but that ended up going bad as he got knocked out by Anthony Joshua in his second fight after having a really great fight against Tyson Fury. And this was a knockout cold. You could find the clip on YouTube or any social media platform, but it is one of the most brutal boxing knockouts I've seen in quite a long time. However, after that, Francis Ngannou went to the PFL, which if you don't know what that is, that's the second biggest MMA organization in the world now that Bellator's gone. It's the second most popular one behind the UFC, and there's not a clear third choice. It's UFC, then PFL, and everything else. And if we're being honest, PFL is pretty much everything else. UFC has a monopoly on MMA as a sport, which has its pros and it has its cons. We get to see all the best fighters in one organization, but that means that we have to watch UFC no matter what bad fights they do, what bad rules they have, no matter what. If you want to watch good MMA, it's going to be UFC. But Francis Ngannou did fight a good heavyweight in the PFL, and he did fight for the heavyweight championship there, where he knocked him out. It was a great fight from Francis. He made quick work of the other heavyweight. I forget his name. I'm sorry if that makes me a casual, not knowing a heavyweight's name in the PFL, but he knocked him out with ease and reminded everyone how good of an MMA fighter Francis is. Even after a few years off, he looked great in the octagon. And when you look back at Francis Ngannou's MMA career in the UFC, he had a lot of notable wins over people like Stipe Miocic, Cyril Gane, Alistair Overeem, Cain Velasquez, and 2 wins over Curtis Blades. And then he had a bunch of wins over scrubs, but that's how every MMA career is. But those are very notable wins that Francis Ngannou did have, and he did hold the belt in the UFC. So that makes it hard to think that Francis wouldn't be a force to be reckoned with upon his return to the UFC. However, there are a couple fighters that I think would have pretty interesting fights with Francis and could give him a run for his money. The 2 obvious ones are Tom Aspinall and Jon Jones. That's a very close fight against either of those guys. You could pick whoever you want there, but I think those fights, both of them, could go either way. And then you have other fighters like Alexander Volkov or Jailton Almeida, or even a knockout fighter himself, Sergey Pavlovich. Although he hasn't looked the best recently, he is still one of the best heavyweights in the world. And all these aforementioned fights would be absolutely huge fights for the UFC that would attract millions of fans around the world, especially if you had Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones, or if Tom Aspinall beats Jon Jones, or if Jon Jones vacates and you have Francis Ngannou versus Tom Aspinall for the belt. That's going to be a mega fight in the heavyweight division too. So it's in my opinion that the UFC should do everything in their power that they can do to get Francis Ngannou to come back to the UFC. I know he's at PFL and I believe he's under contract there, but if he could get back to the UFC, that would do wonders for this organization, who seems to be letting all the super fights slip out of their hands recently. But anyways, you guys let me know down below, if Francis Ngannou came back to the UFC, how would he do these days, specifically against a Tom Aspinall or a Jon Jones? I'm really interested to hear what you guys have to think. But with that being said, thank you for watching the end of this video. We'll have another video out probably Thursday, and I will see you guys then. Deuces.